Hello everyone who study ethology with us, and today we have the second topic, general characteristic of the different types of animal behavior. And today we will talk about inborn, innate behavior, and the next class we will talk about learned behavior. And now the second slide, we all respond to stimuli from the environment, you know this, and how we respond to a stimulus represents our personality and mental state, and this is called behavior. There are two types of behavior of animals, innate and learned behavior in general. We have already discussed this table in the last class, and now we will consider this topic in more detail. So let's start with the innate form of behavior. What is this? You know, intensive fixed action pattern based on genetics, not modified by individual, just by environment, low variation in population, evolved through natural selection, and examples, you know, this is instincts. And next class we will talk about learned behavior, and it's not for today. And for today, the next slide. Here we see the change in behavior in the evolutionary, and these forms of behavior are predominant in primitive organism, very primitive. Here we see the blue color, and of course some animals have this innate form, and even in humanity we have this some primitive form and instincts, of course, but innate behavior among animals. And what is this? Innate behavior is the ability of an animal to respond spontaneously to a situation or a stimulus, different stimulus, and animal behavior is based on instinct and the spontaneous inner drive to respond to a stimulus can be considered innate. Innate responses are not dependent on the animal's cognition. They are based on natural behaviors that are more or less anonymous for species or population, and these behaviors are considered to be genetic and can adapt through natural selection. The migration of birds, animals, and even crops, and even butterflies depend on the availability of responses, is an innate behavior in response to season changes. Change or delay in the season can directly impact the migratory patterns or behavior of animals, and this has been observed in bird. Of course, you know this migration of the bird. And here we see the innate behavior forms. 5 groups of innate behavior for primitive organism: tropism, taxis, kinesis, and for high forms, reflexes, but not just reflexes, it's unconditioned reflex, and FOPs, instincts. So let's start to discuss all these groups. And first, what we have, what is this tropism? Tropism is the part of an organism moves in response to stimulus, and here we see the phototropism for plants. You know, it's not only for animals. Taxis, it's a directed orientation movement of a motor organism in response to stimulus, and here we see the types of taxis. It can be thermotaxis, phototaxis, and We also discussed all these forms and tropism and taxes in our previous class, and you know that we have in general positive taxes, movement toward the stimul, and negative taxes, movement away from stimul. And what we have a little bit more taxes in general. Taxes is the directional movement of an organism towards or away from the stimulus. In taxes, the animal's body takes up a particular direction which may be combined with locomotion, so that the animal moves towards or away from the stimulus at a fixed end. When an animal moves towards the stimulus, their response is termed positive taxis, and when an animal moves away from the stimulus, their response is termed negative taxis. And for example, you know of the euglena movement and its classic movement in taxis, and the examples of the chemotaxis, thermotaxis, different even electrical taxis. And here we see this difference from the taxis and kinesis. It's just movement, but the movement with orientation, not just random movement like in a kinesis. Taxis is the direction movement which occur towards positive or away like a negative. So next we have the more complicated forms of behavior, complex forms of behavior, and start with the unconditioned reflex. Who studied physiology with us already know everything about the formation of such a response of the body, and those who have not studied it yet can watch the video using the links. I will leave the links. And our practice class from the physiology, like work physiology of nerve fibers and spinal cord, especially here we see the reflector function of the spinal cord. But here we see the basic form of organization of behavior for high forms of organization, and here you see the innate behavior, but two parts of innate behavior. For higher forms of animals, it's unconditioned reflex and instincts. In short, if we say what is this unconditioned reflex? Reflex action is an invariable, involuntary and rapid reaction response to the stimulus. A reflex is made possible by neural pathways called reflector arc or reflex arcs, which can act on an impulse before that impulse reaches the brain. Just here we see the only spinal cord and spinal cord reflex, you know, this knee reflex, and that is need not involve an awareness of the stimulus and talking forward of the bend of the freely suspended human leg on paring the knee tendon, and it's a well-known reflex, you know. But the unconditioned reflex is innate, genetically determined, specific for species, and especially here we see the stereotypical reaction of the organism to the biological signal stimuli of external or internal environment, and that is performed with central nerve system part, especially spinal cord. And types of unconditioned reflex: it can be simple and compound reflex. In simple reflex, the stimulus is dependent by the sensory neurons, and they transmit impulses to the spinal cord. Spinal cord then send impulses to the some part of the body where stimulus is applied, and through motor neurons. Motor neurons then activates effector muscle or gland or some organs, and thus simple reflex involves particular part of the body only. In compounded reflex, the sensory neuron sends impulses to spinal cord, and the spinal cord sends impulses to two or more parts of the body through several motor neurons, and this results in the activation of number of effector muscle glands, some organs in different parts of the body, and thus compound reflex involves several regions of the body for a particular stimulus. And for example, when a gazelle bears hair alone, it's only from the sensory system of the nerve system, and almost all the muscles in the deer's body will react. So it's just contract and stimulate preparing to the bear to the run away from the direction of nose as soon as possible. This is a typical flight response which involves activation of the several muscles, mainly in the limb, and also several glands such as the adrenal gland, and release adrenaline like a response to the stress. So just a simple example, and one more here with the orientative and investigatory reflex, like an increased alertness during to the head and eyes to the direction of a sudden stimulus. In animals, this reflex also involves investigation or a new surrounding, a new cage, for example. So here we see the second part of the reflexes, a light reflex. Reflexes are set of reflexes which are combined. It's to bring about a harmonious effect. For example, the synchronized muscular contraction and relaxation in both the wings of birds. For example, for just to do the steps, especially it is difficult for animals because they have the 4 legs and limbs. It's difficult to synchronize all steps together. The muscular movement combined in a male during walking or in a earthworm, right, even for just simple animals. The third, chain reflex. Chain reflexes are a series of reflexes which serve as a stimulus for the next, making a complete activity. In chain reflexes, a stimulus causes a particular reflex action in organism. This reflex response acts as a stimulus for another reflex response, and so on until the whole activity gets completed. For example, a frog responds to the stimulus on moving insects by opening its mouth and catapulting capturing the insect with its tongue. The captured prey then stimulates the receptors in the buccal cavity to cause closing of mouth and to start swallowing movements in the pharynx and esophagus. And tonic reflexes are slow and long-lasting response. And we have the phasic reflexes are fast and short-lived response. They occur during flexion response of the body. And here we see one more centers. So here we see the central nerve system levels for unconditioned reflex, and as it said that it is the level primary for spinal cord, spinal motor neurons, and of course the highest centers we have in the cortex, but mainly it's spinal cord level. For example, one more examples for unconditioned reflex, it is the muscle stretch reflex, blinking reflex, and reflex of the brain ischemia, even if we said about pathology. But infant or newborn reflexes, examples, the palmar reflex and walking stepping reflexes, for not only for humans, for all animals. And one more about, in general, about unconditioned reflex. It has spice specificity displayed as the body grows constant, and here we see the stereotypical, and we talk about the stereotypical like a norm, because we have the stereotypical behavior like a pathology, basic for formation, and stimuli cause them, and cortex isn't involved, sometimes involved but not for in general, and enables spices representative and false spices survival, maintain homeostasis. So what we have for the next class, unconditional reflex is the basis for conditional reflex formation. So we talk about unconditional reflex in next class 2. And about stereotypes, here we see the term. What is this? Stereotypes are repetitive and involuntary, sometimes apparently fictionless behaviors, and they are typically displayed by animals in captivity but not in the wild. For this reason, they are considered as abnormal behaviors and often used as an indicator of the poor welfare or the damage of the brain, especially for animals which are in zoo in very small space and with a very poor movement. Despite several decades of reaching, the causal factors underlying stereotypicals are still unclear, and some stereotypes have been hypothesized to be an index of current frustration or chronic stress, the production of the damaged brain, satisfied way to perform a natural behavior in an artificial environment, or an efficient way to cope with stress. So I think it's true. The stress is very important, and here we see stereotypical pacing for some animals, for home keeping animals, for goats. I don't know what kind of animals. I think the goats or sheep. Yes, it's sometimes connected with the stress and damage the brain. So in a norm, we start to next behavior. It's instincts. Instincts is the inborn tendency to behave in a way characteristic of the spices, natural and predictable response to the stimuli. Instincts, the inherent inclination of a living organism towards a particular complex behavior, and sometimes we hear that instincts manifested as a fixed pattern of action. Here we see fixed action pattern and a predictable series of actions triggered by a cue, sometimes called a cue stimulus, and also the fixed action pattern is more complex than the reflex. It's still automatic and involuntary, but once started, it will continue to the complexion even if the key stimulus is removed in the meantime. Even so, that can't stop. And here we see the fixed action pattern is a series or sequence of acts that occur behaviorally in animals. The series is unchangeable and will be carried out to completion once started, regardless of change in the original stimulus. It's also known as instinctive behavior because it's determined by then of the organism, so genetically determined. And here we see the about instincts as a complex, innate, stereotypical behavioral reactions that arise under the action of the certain external factors and the certain internal conditions. Sometimes it depends on the hormones. Usually instincts depend on the hormonal status of the organism and the presence of the triggering stimulus. The instincts depend on the some nerve centers in limb system and hypothalamus, like main gland. For example, of instincts are sea turtles. New babies on the beaches will automatically move to the ocean, and with the honeybees and the bird nests, you know this example. This slide we see in previous practical. And one more examples, and just the rolling of the eggs, you know it too. So start from the kinds of instincts. We have some kinds of instincts, some types. It's instinct of aggression to fend off predators and to protect young and to protect food sources. Sometimes we said about submission, shown by the weaker animal, courtship and territory instincts, and even more, and for instincts about behavioral cycles, like circadian rhythm, econic daily patterns. Its internal case important in determining the sleeping and feeding patterns of all animals, and even I leave the links who want to know more about this. And about cycles behavior, we will talk about this in the future in our classes. But in circadian rhythm, you know that we have the animals that are active during the daytime and animals that are active in the night time. So this is different names for this animals. But next one, instinct, it is instinct migration. It's periodic movement from one place to another place, and a lot of species migrate, and even salmon migration, even butterflies migrate and can be triggered by hormones, those magnetic fields, I don't know, maybe geographical clues, and we will talk about this too. One more interesting, it's hibernation. It's just to sleep. Some animals sleep all the time during the winter. You reduce the need for energy and can be caused by the temperature changes, in a daylight changes, and something else. But the very big animal can sleep almost all winter. And something where is the same situation. It's dormancy during summer, take place during times of the heat and dryness, and even the crocodile can estivate sometime in a very, very aggressive area of the heat. It's of course the Nile crocodile in Africa. So the next question, aggression. We discussed about all these forms of the instincts more detail. The aggression is a social behavior essential for securing the territory, securing the family, thanks to this function in competition and thus survival. Aggression exists widely across animal species, including humans too, and classical works from the Inborn and Lawrence concluded that this behavior included aggression and mediated by hardwired brain that specialized in processing certain sensory inputs to trigger stereotypical motor outputs, and they further suggest that instinctive behavior are influenced by an animal's internal state and past experience. And following this conceptual work here, we require our current understanding regarding the neural substance underlying aggression generation and evolutionary concept co-aggression thought. And you know that some parts of the brain take role in aggression in the brain, the hypothalamus and some parts of the brain of the midbrain are the most critical areas for controlling aggression in mammals, as shown in the studies on the cats, rats, and even on the monkeys. And can we extrapolate from these things? I don't know. I even just think that there are direct connection with both the brainstem nuclei. Here just we don't see the brainstem, and this nuclear controlling this function and areas such as the amygdala and even the prefrontal cortex. Here we see this part of the cortex. And what we have, this aggressive state, it can need some factors like stress, even daytime, state of the reproductive glands, reproductive system, and hunger. Sometimes it's just energy, and some to a certain extent everything can depend on genetic, and we will return to this issue when we consider psychology types of animals and even for humans. In animals, aggression is most often manifested in showing teeth. Yes, we know this animal is showing the teeth, and animal intimates another bird calling, showing teeth, like this dog, and different food supply territory or young babies. And even I want to leave some links to this video. If you want to know more, I will leave a link to useful site and this article on the types of aggression for dogs in dogs. And here we see the type of aggression for dogs. And recent studies of aggression are not so clear-cut, especially in the relationship to the people. So next one, what is this aggression? Inborn, it's instinct, but we don't know, maybe it's not inborn. So next one, instincts and several slides that describe modern theories about aggression. And we'll talk about Bandura's theory, you know, the Sam Lawrence theory, and even more frustration aggression hypothesis, aggression Q hypothesis. So it's a very difficult question, but we move on the next slide. And here we see submissive behavior for animals. So animals might show submissive behavior to avoid being injured or to show that another animal is dominant. Form of animal behavior in which one individual attempts through displaced to avoid injury by a dominant member of its own species, but not always all own species. And displays are commonly found in species that are well arranged for, especially for carnivores, in social. It's like animals which live in groups. The displays, even when performed by adult males, commonly convert elements of inheritable behavior, so for wolves. And sometimes the submissive animal exposes its most vulnerable spot, such as the throat and dominant animal. So here are the examples of this kind of behavior for animals. For next one, what is this immigration? So migration, it is this just like a part of the season migration, and just a part of circadian rhythms in the intensive seasonal movement of animals. And many birds and animals move to new location when the season change, and most animals that migrate to do so in order to find food or to reproduce in an environment that is more favorite and in different times of the year. And what is migration? Migration is the regular movement from one season to another, and this is for migration: sustained movement, physical endurance, mechanism for storing energy. And migration ensures animals which have just to find food will be able to reproduce. And types of migration may occur as a round trip, as a return migration, and some lifetime to complete, like a salmon migration, just to have breath for new fishes. And here we know when to migrate, how animals understand what time to migrate. Some theories, they have the internal signals, hormones trigger, and or inside or each mate reproductive organs. Internal signals includes temperature changes, daylight hours changes, and even a food supply. And what we have, how do animals know where to do this? So its abilities to navigate, and it is of course to have the memory, or just landmarks like a sun orientation, just a passage of days and months. So it is a very difficult question. And internal clues are sensitive to a mineral nose, as a magnetic, even magnetic, and found in many animals, including even humans. And for example, gray whales, it's large animals to migrate on their retinas and help them navigate you see this big journey. And one more, even for little animals, for insects, learning migration, and to use little or not directional clues. It's a lot of questions about this. And learn more. I'll leave links to this video to know about migration a little bit more. But here we see that sometimes some animals migrate together. At the individual level, migrants interacting with other migration species could experience changes in a migratory cost, and even in the same time. And it's new theory about migration. Some species migrate together. So and hazards of migration, of course, it's we have the two categories, two types, and natural hazards and man-made hazards. It's very now barriers and water and aircrafts, of course, especially for birds. So if you want to about migration, sometimes people won't know about migration more and more, so I leave the links and very good the book on the Amazon. You can buy it and learn more. So move next. Hibernation. Hibernation is a cycle response to cold temperatures and limited food supplies. So an animal in hibernation remains inactive until the weather becomes warm in the spring, for example, and body response, body temperature and breathing rate drop. And some animals and many amphibians and reptiles hibernate, and this state where the body temperature drops substantially, oxygen consumption decrease, and breathing rates and heart beating rates decline to a few breaths per minute. Animals that go into hibernation to survive the cold winter months, when food is usually just nothing to eat in this state, amounts food to build up body fat before. So it's usually eat a lot in the summer days, summer times, and then just sleep. And for big animals, for bears, for example, the same. These animals have to eat all time, all summer time. And estivation. Estivation states of the reduced activity similar to hibernation, and very often we can find it in desert animal species. Sometimes estivate due to the lack of food, or periods of when it's very hot time, and of course it should be under the surface of the earth. And here we see some species, especially for species which live in the water, even in the water, aquatic. So we have the species, aquatic species. So next, what about estivation? During periods of extreme heat or droughts, and what we have the examples for frogs, bees, and reptiles and snails. And here we see our homework. Here we see your homework in a book, Animal Behavior. You should read the pages here where is the chapter 4 about animal migration, bird migration, fish migration, and even about insect migration. And here I will leave the links on our physiology classes, and some about circadian rhythms and submission, animal migration, and about operant conditioning. So see you next time. Bye bye.